Hey everybody, it's been a few weeks since we've done our Teachable Mondays, but I want to get back into this groove and bring to you these videos again just to help shed some light into the church, why we do the things that we do, and why it is that we have what's called a liturgy, and why do we worship in the fashion that we worship in. And I'm going to give you guys a sneak peek into upcoming sermon series. So this Sunday, I'm going to start to move into a new series, and I'm going to bridge a little bit of what we've been doing with Moses, but I want to start focusing on elements of the Christian faith in today's world. Why do we believe what we believe? And that will kind of go alongside with what these videos are doing. Why do we believe what we believe? Where does all this Christianity stuff come from? Obviously we have the Bible, but then there's 2,000 years of church history between the time of the Bible and today. So we have a lot of ground that we can cover, and we will make sure we hit all of those finer points as we move along. But our focus right now is worship, and we've been working through some various concepts in these last few videos on the overall premise of worship. More importantly, the liturgy. Now, liturgy is basically just a structure of service. It just indicates what you do from point A to point B to point C, and then you conclude. And liturgies could be something so simple that a church service might start with, introduction, and then they have opening songs, and then an opening prayer, and then they might do a communion, or they might do other announcements. And then they do a sermon, and then they close with a few songs and a prayer, and then they're done. So that's the most simplest form of a liturgy that you can get, where it's just real to the point in what it does. But the heaviest focus in those types of structures are obviously around the music and the emotional drive. And we're going to look at some of those types of services as they come down the line later on. I'm working through a book right now, Lutheran liturgical worship, and so we are going to explore kind of the differences between why we do the things in the Lutheran Church versus why maybe another church down the road, the non-denominationals or the Baptist or Methodist church, do the things they do. And we are going to explore and hopefully teach you the premise behind the Lutheran thought. So with that, if we turn to Scripture, we can see worship being given throughout the entire Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, worship is one of the biggest emphasized pieces in Scripture. And there's so many Bible verses to go and pull from, but my focus is not so much on what the Bible verses are doing, but I want to really start to zero in on kind of the structure. Because if we turn to the Old Testament, as we've been doing in our sermon series, we can see the beginnings of what we would consider a liturgical structure. God gives Moses and Aaron the right way to worship him. He gives them the boundaries, the location, the process, every single detail to how the Israelites were to worship him. That's a liturgy. So when the Israelites would come and worship God, they followed this pattern. And this was the same pattern that was used throughout all of the Old Testament and into the time of Jesus. And when Jesus comes, he even affirms it by going into the temple. He reads the prophets, and and then they'll do a small teaching on it, and that's their service. They'll do prayers and other things like that. But the other thing to consider too, there's differences between Old Testament worship, New Testament worship. We don't have to, atone for sacrifices anymore. We have communion in baptism now as sacraments given in the Christian church, whereas in the Jewish church, those don't exist. So as he is going along this process, Jesus is teaching out of what he's written, right? He is the author of Scripture. And so the New Testament and the Old Testament are just a continuation of showing us the importance of a liturgy. So when the early church comes around, after Jesus has ascended, and we've kind of looked at some of the early structures in the book of Acts, they were not lost. They didn't have, they weren't left out into the weeds, and they didn't have anything to move by, but they had the clear and concise means by which the Jewish people of that time worshiped God with. And so they used a lot of that same structuring in their church. And so the early church would sometimes structure it. Most of the time it would be a full day event. It would start in the morning and it would go, prayers, and then there would be scriptural readings, and then a sermon, and then more prayers, and then praise would be done throughout. They'd sing the Psalms, and they'd be praises, doxology, stuff like that. And then they would generally towards the end of the service, they would end up kicking out any non-believers, because then they would partake in the sacrament. And they held such a strong belief that only believers could partake in the sacraments. That is the Lord's Supper. So that is really just kind of the beginning pieces to all of this. And we'll start to see and explore as we go along in these videos kind of some of the earliest forms of liturgical worship and what we have that has survived to this day, and how do we compare that to what we do today in the Lutheran Church. And then we will see, what the elements of that liturgical service are. Why do we open with the brief order confession? Why do we have a prayer of the day? Why do we say the creeds? Why do we do the Lord's Prayer? Why do we have a benediction? Why are there sermons? Why are there readings of Scripture? And why do we sing praises? So those are all elements that we will explore more in depth as we go along in this little video series. So I won't keep it too long. I want to cut this, shorter, so that way you can kind of regurgitate it. But please make sure this is obviously nowhere near exhaustive, and we're barely even actually chipping away at the tip of the iceberg here. Worship is such a complex and deep subject, and so if you are interested in any sort of books or anything that would talk about that, let me know and I can get you some recommendations. And if it's coming from me, it won't be dry. I do enjoy some dry readings from time to time, but I also like to not put that burden on other people. So please reach out to me, let me know what you guys think. Otherwise, we will see you Wednesday for our next installment of our Devotional Wednesday. So have a great week. Enjoy the warm weather. God bless and be good.